Not really. I mean, some people can see it that way.
So my name is Brad Efford. I'm here on campus. I helped organize this event, and I will be moderating this great student panel that we have going. I'm going to kind of let them introduce themselves, so I won't be introducing them necessarily, but we have Kaylin and Amy and Abby and Brittany, and they're all here to talk to you about their experiences, and I'll just be kind of on the side here tossing questions their way and kind of leading that discussion. So if you want to start and just kind of say your name and what school you came from, and we'll move on from there.
Hello everyone, I'm Brittany Weiss and I'm from the University of Montana, and I'm a Management Information Systems and Management major, and I'm a senior who will be graduating in May.
My name is Abigail Lane and I'm from UM as well, and I'm a senior studying Forest Resource Management.
I'm Kaylin Dorhauer. I'm from MSU Bozeman, so I'm in the friendly Grizz country, you know. I'm a senior in Health and Human Performance, so I'll be graduating in May, and my minor is Latino and Latin American Studies.
Hello, my name is Amy Stiffarm. I'm from Salish Kootenai College, and I'm a junior in the Life Sciences program.
So if you guys can kind of start by saying what experiences you've had with service learning, or if it was called something different on your campus or anything like that, kind of what classes you're taking or what classes you took, and where you worked for those courses.
All right, I did a service learning project through my Leadership and Motivation class, which is a management course here on campus. And I volunteered with the flagship program and was the instructor of their Young Entrepreneurs program at Washington Middle School here in town.
And I, this past fall, was a part of, it's a required class called Timber Management, and we worked with the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation doing like the timber sale and whatnot for on the Blackfoot Clearwater Game Range, and just kind of learning about the whole ecology of developing those types of systems.
Okay, I was involved in service learning in two different aspects. One class was Latino migration, and so we worked with TSCTOs, which is an organization in Bozeman that helps with tutoring and providing activities for the Latino children in the greater Gallatin Valley, and also with the Leadership Fellows program at MSU. I was able to do the same thing, but in a different aspect, I guess, but still working with TSCTS.
Well, I guess I'm in, mine varies being a life science major. I'm a student intern in the cellular molecular biology lab. Some of the service learning that I do is actually doing outreach with high school students. So for me, it's learning at a whole nother level. It's a lot different learning when you're teaching other people. So that really helps, considering that I would like to teach at a university one day. I'm also, this is my third year on Student Senate, and I'm currently the student body president, and so that entails lots of different activities all throughout campus and on the Flathead Reservation.
So kind of start with Amy at that, and we go the other way this time. But I'm interested in hearing about what challenges you kind of came up against in working with these organizations and trying to tie it to a course or tie it to the work that you're doing on campus as a student. And then kind of what was easiest about it, what didn't end up posing a challenge, and kind of elaborate on that a little bit if you can.
So what challenges I personally have is being a science major. It's kind of, especially my instructors, they're like, Student Senate, are you sure you can handle this? Are you sure this is really what you want to take part in, given that you're in the sciences career and you're looking into healthcare? I don't know if you guys believe this as well, but some people say that scientists often are kind of awkward and have bad people skills. That will, somewhat because they're in the lab so much, I guess. So I guess I go against the grain, and I want to make sure that that's not who I am. That does not define who I am. And I do want to be part of not only my tribal policies concerning public health and whatnot. So Student Senate provides that leadership quality, and being 3 consecutive years, it's really helped me become a better leader, a better speaker, and helped me get my point across in different aspects of schooling and whatnot. But the challenges that we personally have with Student Senate is not being able to find other students. We find volunteers. Volunteers have been coming, and especially this past year, it's been really great. But it's hard to find students that are willing to step up and lead their own organization. Student Senate at SKC is a lot different than Student Senate here at the U of M or MSU Bozeman and whatnot, the big institutions. Student Senate was the very first thing started, and so we have all these different staples that we have to do, such as haunted house or food drives, and things that we feel are important and should not be left out. But we feel as student leaders on Student Senate that we should be more of the student voice between administration, instead of serving food during lunch once a month for free and whatnot. So that's the problem that we have, is all these staples that we need to meet because of the history of our college, and finding new leaders that are willing and to go beyond what their comfort zone is, and to step up and start their own organization that can take away some of the staples that Student Senate has had.
Okay. Very good. As far as challenges for myself, I think learning how to be flexible was a big deal with service learning, just in particular with TOs. With the Latino community, you learn that time is, it could be 5 o'clock, could mean 5:30, and then you have to learn how to be flexible. And so that was a big thing that I had to get used to, because I'm very structured. Like, if 5 o'clock, we're 5 o'clock, and so I got used to that. And then as far as I'm also in the sciences, so again with structure, all of my classes were read the book, memorize the material, take the test. And that's how I got through all 3 years. And then I started with service learning the end of my junior year, and it was different. I was like, what is service learning? And so I was like, how do I think outside of that box? I've always been in the box, and I've done well in the box. So thinking outside of the box was a little more for me. Self-reflection was a big deal that I didn't understand. I thought if I did the assignment and I wrote that I learned from it, then that's what counted. But trying to, my professors have encouraged me to dig deeper. I'm like, well, how deep can I get? I did the assignment, and I told you what I learned. But the self-reflection, understanding your core values and what you stand for, and how what you're doing in the community really affects who you are as a person, was a big deal for me. And then when you start self-reflecting, you get better at it. So you're able to get deeper and deeper. And I think that's been a huge thing for me, although it presented a challenge in the beginning. I think I've gotten a lot better at that. And as far as challenge, I think at Montana State University, I would say is to incorporating enough service learning in the classes. I mean, as my senior year, I've had 3 classes with service learning, but before that there was nothing. And I think it's a big deal to get the word out as to what it is, what the benefits are of having this in your curriculum, and what the students are learning from it, because it's a big deal to take on, I think, as a professor or faculty, to restructure your entire curriculum and say, okay, well, they're really going to get a lot out of this, but that's a lot of work. And so I obviously encourage professors and faculty to consider it and put it into what they think we can get out of it, because it turns out being a greater reward than I think most people do expect. So.
Okay, well, my service learning was a little different, I suppose. My biggest challenge was the lack of direction, I would call it, because you get this large area, acres, and you have to decide how you're going to sell this timber off of it. But there's so much more than just what lays there. And so the lack of direction, and considering what kind of roads you might build, or the wildlife, the ecological factors, the water and everything. And working with a state agency, the DNRC, posed many challenges too, because we didn't really have the opportunity to sit down with them and talk with them about like what their agency likes to do. And so it was very undirected, and you had to look things up and find your own knowledge and like background information and things like that. But it was also very successful in the long run, because it taught me that that's kind of what the rest of my life is going to be like, is I have to go out and figure out what's going to happen. And so that was very beneficial.
If I can ask, was the misdirection, you think, or currently coming from faculty or the organization, or was it a mixture of both?
I would probably say more from the faculty, but I think that was the purpose, to have us understand, and at the end of the project being like,
Kind of
okay, this is how everything comes together.
Right. Great.
I think my biggest challenge was just learning how to lead middle school students. All my leadership experience was with, my peers in group project settings or in my previous work experience. And I quickly learned that directing a bunch of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders is not the same as directing 20-year-olds. So I quickly started reapplying different leadership theories we'd learned in that class. And my other biggest challenge was just taking everything that I knew about entrepreneurship and understanding that I had to find a way to get through to those kids, because they don't know, the finance terms that we do, and they're not writing 35-page business plans, and they need to learn all the same things that we do, but just in a different way. So I quickly learned to drop the jargon, the business school jargon, and just dive in and get them going. And I actually, it was successful, because I actually got asked to come back and teach an accelerated program for some kids that were still interested in it. And so I went and did that this month. And then my other challenge was just working with a co-leader that had a very different style and just a different levels of enthusiasm. My co-leader, I'm very type A and very organized, and if I'm doing something, I'm doing it 100%. And I had a co-leader from the education department that didn't have that same philosophy. So we didn't have the same idea of how to plan for a course. We didn't have the same idea of punctuality. And I quickly just learned that that's just the way life is, and you just have to figure out how to deal with that. So I would say those were my biggest challenges.
So Brittany and Kaylin, I've noticed that you guys both talked about being very structured people, and having that be a hindrance as well as kind of a help in doing your work outside of the classroom. Is it the same for the other two, for Amy and Abigail, I wonder, or are you both kind of a little bit more free in your scheduling, or I don't mean free, but I mean a little bit more like less completely structured about your lives at all? Or I'm just interested if there's like a diversity among the panel in that way.
Oh no, I'm definitely very type A and very structured. So that was one, I guess, that I forgot to mention. One of my challenges was actually, okay, maybe I won't take this project all on myself. Okay, I really do need your help. I'll delegate this to you instead of not making sure it's perfect, and I trust you to do it. So that was probably one of the best things I learned, because I realized it's not as hard as I thought it was to just let somebody else do it. But that was definitely a task for me, because I wanted to oversee everything and make sure it was going right and it was going the way I had thought it would be. And it's fine if things don't turn out the way you intended, because then sometimes that's the best way.
Yeah, I would say I'm a very structured person as well, and so that was challenging to not have structure and have to deal with that and figure things out for yourself. And working with group members who aren't as structured and not knowing, just working with them and figuring things out and putting things on paper was very difficult at times, but yes.
And I know that you specifically had just mentioned that you kind of realized that here, this work that I'm doing is what I'm going to be doing and what I want to be doing. And so kind of having an experience with that is helpful, and it's helping me see what is hard for me now and what's easy for me now. Do you guys, I'd like to get an idea about how your experience with these types of courses is really helping you towards what you want to do after school, or if it is at all, if it's helping you realize maybe this isn't what I thought I wanted to do, or if it's helping you realize the opposite. If in your work outside of the classroom in these areas, you're coming to a conclusion that, yeah, I'm doing a good job at this, and this is really what I do want to do.
Well, probably the opposite. It definitely solidified the fact that I don't want to work with middle school students in an extended capacity. Sorry, they're great, but not for me. But they really helped me because I am trying to start my own business in tandem, and they kept asking me how I was doing it, and I kept having to figure out how to break that down, and it really made me understand the core competencies, if I can say that word, which is obviously not one of my core competencies, of my own business, and really break it down to be able to explain it to a 6th, 7th, and 8th grader. And also just working with them just really solidified the fact that I'm excited about entrepreneurship, and that's what I like. And it was really great to see kids that are starting to get excited about that at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level, because it took me until 24 or 25 to figure out that that's what I wanted.
Sorry, I just turned that
And I would say that my service learning has definitely helped shape my career interests or future things, because, you just walk, what we did, it was 6 hours every Wednesday, and we would go around and measure trees, look at them. I got to see a grizzly bear cub, a bunch of elk and whatnot, and just being out there in that scene really gives you a sense of wholeness, and that's what I really like about forestry and this timber management service learning project. Was I got a very good sense of wholeness, because you get the ecological aspect, but then there's so much about the economic aspect. We had to figure out how much it costs for a truck per hour to get it to a mill, and how much the mill takes for that amount of board feed or whatnot and everything. And so I think it definitely helped me decide that I chose the correct direction for my life, because I get every aspect of everything that I wanted. So
I think mine absolutely positively helped me figure out what I want to go do in the future. Again, I want to stick to my science roots, but I think that service learning has helped me develop a social awareness that I didn't really have before. And with that, and through also with self-awareness plus social awareness, I think you're a more well-rounded individual, and having that balance is super important in the workforce today, because I can go and apply for a job and I have that technical leadership. I've learned the A's through the Z's as for how to do the job. But with that adaptive leadership, you're able to, show that you have those skills of being aware of others, and to show that you've been a community member, and what that means to you, I think is incredibly important, because we can all go to school and we can all, memorize the books if we want to, and say that on our resume, we got it done. And then you go to the interview, it's I think a lot of people in careers want more, when they're hiring you, what else can you give to this company? What else can you give, to your employers and employees? And I think that having service learning in my background has been incredibly helpful, because I'm aware of that now, and I'm able to bring those skills to the job place, and I think it'll really help me in the future. So.
Well, for me, being a science major, like I said, most of my instructors in the science field were like, "What are you thinking, student senate?" But for me, it really is helping, because Native Americans are so underrepresented in science fields, in all STEM fields, and what I really want to do, because the opportunities weren't given to me in high school. They didn't say, "Amy, if you enrolled if you go into science careers, you can work doing this, or you can get these scholarships, or you can intern here. No one ever came to me and let me aware of those. And so being on Student Senate, I've learned to be a leader, and I'm going to take those leadership skills and use them in my science careers so I can serve on boards like SACNAS, the Society Advancing Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. So I can serve on boards and bring the idea of cultural competence to those boards, and I can represent my people on those boards. And having this background of Student Senate really helped me, I think, gain those leadership skills that I need to not only being a woman in science, but being a Native American in science really is going to help me pursue my dreams.
Yeah, and Amy, you and Kaylin have both kind of already touched on this, but I'm interested in hearing all of you guys kind of elaborate on this idea that who you are as a person outside of the academy, outside of the college campus. How has kind of working out within a community kind of helped to shape your role as a community member rather than just a student who's going out into the community for like a few hours a week or like an hour a week or whatever? How have these types of courses helped to really define your role as a community member? If you have any ideas.
I would say personally, with TSCTOs, you're working with the Latino community that's underrepresented in Montana. And that was something that I was a little closed-minded to when I started off. And I mean, I'll admit that. I was like, well, it's Montana, but I didn't really think about it. And then taking the courses and being involved with service learning, I realized that importance and like that need for the care and community involvement for not only Latinos or just the rest of Bozeman, but everybody in the whole community, and why it's so important. And I feel like in the past 4 years of being at Bozeman, I mean, I was a student. I don't know if I was a community member. That's where I went to school. But now I feel like I'm more of a community member, and I've made my mark somehow in someone's life in Bozeman. And I think that's a very rewarding feeling, to know that you're making a difference in a positive way. And also just to recognize what it really means to be a community member rather than living in a place, but to branch out and to reach out. And through service learning, I've had the opportunity to do that. And it's also expanded my views on things that I was perhaps maybe a little, I don't know, like I said, closed-minded about. So it opens up your eyes, and I guess opens up your heart and your arms, and it's just like a great experience altogether. But I could go off on that, but I won't. But with service learning, I did it for a class, and yeah, it was required. Like, that was a part of your grade. But I'm still involved with TSCTOs, and I'm not in the class anymore, but it's something that I wanted to do to continue because it made such an impression on myself that it's like, this is a good thing. Like, you don't have to be in a classroom to keep doing it. And I plan on continuing volunteering in Bozeman or wherever else I go with my career, but hopefully I'll be in Montana to keep doing that. So yeah, big impression on my life.
Definitely for me, I struggled initially just getting to college. I do attend Salish and Kootenai College, but I am an enrolled member of the Gros tribe of Fort Belknap Indian Reservation on the High Line, close to Harlem and Havre, north central Montana. So growing up, since I could walk, well, definitely I had to be walking, but we were always, the close-knit community of tribal reservations is amazing. As a child, ever since I was young, I knew that if we were at a feed, that it was my responsibility to get up and make sure that all the elders were fed first before I even got in line. And that no matter what was going on in the community, we were there helping, whether it was in the kitchen or whether it was setting up chairs or cleaning up afterwards. So when I came to Salish Kootenai College, already, before I even got there, I felt like an outcast. I'd wondered, okay, well, are the Confederated Tribes gonna accept me as a person even though I'm from a different tribe? And so that was a different aspect that I had to overcome, and I knew that to overcome that, I had to be involved in their community and show them that yeah, I care about my people at home, but I care about Native people as a whole, and I care about the college. And so with that, volunteering there, before even being on Student Senate and whatnot, that helped, I believe, the community members, when they would see me around, that made them more open to me. And especially being the student body president at a tribal college where you're not enrolled in those tribes, I think that's why it was, I guess, less hard for me to be in this role, because I was so open, and the community knew that I was there to help in ways that I wasn't used to because of the different cultures from my tribe.
Yeah, I would just say that it's really made me realize like how much Montana as a whole needs entrepreneurship education, and we've heard this like consistently throughout our entrepreneurship programs at the university. But to really see like how excited it gets kids about entrepreneurship and how it benefits the community as a whole just really made me realize that not only do you need to start them young on entrepreneurship, but we just need small business owners in the community to support entrepreneurship education and be active and be involved. And I think that's made me realize that going forward and as I start my own business, to just always remember that and always be involved, whether it's at the university level or at a lower level, and just help push the idea of entrepreneurship education.
Well, service learning has impacted like my role as a citizen beyond the college level, because really, like everyone's kind of touched on a little bit, is like the idea, I think, of like a wholeness in the community and whatnot, and how that's really important. And I'm very like natural resource oriented, I think, and so I think that just making the community aware of how important that the natural world is to everyone, and how valuable that knowledge is that you can get from being out there. And I think that that's really important, and the service learning, I think, really impacted me in that way.
So I have a couple more questions, but I want to give people a chance to ask questions, because we have students here who have a lot of experience and have a lot to say in really articulate ways about their experiences with this. So if you guys have any questions about their experiences at all, or any questions about what you might be able to do to make it more beneficial or easier or harder, if you want to, for the student body, then now's the chance to ask if you have any. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me start off by saying thank you for sharing your experiences with us. It helps us. I want to ask you all the million-dollar question. Why, as students, should you take part in community service learning?
So it's $1 million?
Not really.
I think it's important to give back to the community, no matter which community it is, because I'm a firm believer. One of my philosophies, I guess, is what you put out, you get back. And I totally believe that by doing good to other people, that good things will come to me. Not, whether I'm sure, like AmeriCorps, yeah, there's a stipend involved and whatnot, but not just monetary and not just for greed, but just to make the community a better place for the up and coming youth, so that they can maybe feel a little bit safer to maybe, like in Nadine's talk, to use their imagination and different things, but mainly just to help, just to give back, because I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I've had at SKC, and that is my motivation and my drive, is to give back and to cause a ripple effect to encourage other students to give back too. And the more students that are involved in giving back, then the greater our community can be.
Anybody else?
I think, going along with what she has to say, that it does help just giving back to the community, but also it really helps you as a student refine your skill sets and really understand what you've been learning. I know it helped me tons in just learning about entrepreneurship, but it also helped me with my leadership skills and with confidence and with just dealing with things that get thrown, dealing with middle school kids. I mean, it was a whole new ball game for me. So I feel like it just helped me in many ways because I feel way more prepared. I mean, standing up in front of like some angel investors and VCs is not even remotely as scary as like 6th, 7th, and 8th graders staring at you and wanting you to have all the answers.
I'd say that service learning can be a selfish and a selfless tango, I guess, in itself, because you can be the selfless person of giving back, but if you really are getting a lot out of it, you're going to be receiving just as much as the person on the other end of the door. So it's in that selfishness. I think a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't be selfish, but I think that if you're really benefiting from it and you're growing as a person, then be as selfish as you want to, because of what I've gotten out of the whole experience of service learning is that, like, I've grown immensely in the past year, and I can thank my teachers for having that program in their curriculum. Otherwise, I would have been still reading the book and memorizing the answers and taking the tests. And you can ask me, how'd your test go? Oh, it went well. What'd you learn? You know, like, that's just kind of how it is. We get through and we get by and we get to the end and we graduate. But those experiences, like, to have those under your belt, where else are you going to get them from unless you do it? And so you can't read the book and say that I have these great experiences, or in an interview when they ask you, okay, so on page 57 it said something about how to respond to this, like, what do you have? Like, service learning gives that to you, and so I'm fortunate enough to be able to have received it.
Well, yes, to go along with that too, the experience part of it, the experience is really everything. You gained so much from just getting put out there, and you gain so much, and along with that too comes a connection, is like gaining this connection with the community and the people in it, and understanding the differences, and, you know, being able to create and like bring things to a new level, and like using your imagination and standing up in front of middle school students and whatnot. You know, it's just that whole connection is really important.
Any other questions? Yeah.
To use something Nadine said, how do you feel that your service learning experience will make you better able to create the ideal world you want to live in? Did it give you those tools, I guess, is really the case.
I guess I'll go. One of the quotes that I have to tell myself every day, especially like when you're reading the news or you go to CNN.com and see all the horrible things that are going on in the world. And I truly do believe that we need to be the change we want to see in the world. And that's the change that I want to see, is having Native American students be able to see their opportunities, to think outside the box or outside the res. And that's one of the changes that I want to see. More specifically, one of the changes I want to see on campus is more clubs, and that's my main motive for running for student body president, is to establish more clubs. So not only the change I wanted to see in the world, but the change I wanted to see on campus.
I think sometimes being in business, especially lately, it's really easy to get jaded. And I think just seeing young kids get inspired about entrepreneurship sort of reminds you that it's so much bigger than like the current economy or what's going on right now, and that we really have to stick with it and buckle down and do it for them, because, you know, we've got to just turn it around. And it's really easy to forget that when you're just lost in the Wall Street Journal and you're talking to your professors who are a little bitter and jaded, just like you are. And so just seeing the next generation and making sure that we, you know, push forward for them was huge for me.
Yeah, I think we have the ability to do more than what we let ourselves do. And I think we cap ourselves off. We're busy. We have other things to do, priorities. But then whenever you take those blinders off and you make time to do something to make a difference, then other people are going to see that and be like, oh, you really got something out of it. And then you can spread that word and encourage other people to do things. And before you know it, you're reaching out more hands than just your own. And I think that makes a bigger difference, especially on a community level, and then hopefully expand that upon, like state level and then global level to see that difference. But I think if you just to take the time and realize what needs there are is a huge thing, because it's easy to get caught up on your own world. And service, like being, like a servant leader, is you're trying to make a difference somehow and provide for another person, and it'll grow from there.
We have time for one more question. Josh, is that?
That's kind of, we should end on a dryish note, but I appreciate all of your, sharing your experiences, and it's really inspiring to hear. I'm wondering, kind of from kind of the teaching methods out there, what are kind of the most effective tools for getting you to the point where you are in your respective journeys and careers, and kind of like that greater social awareness, or this kind of theme that you've all been talking about. So like what sorts of teaching tools like were effective in your service learning experiences?
I'd say with the self-reflection, like I said, I had trouble with it. I was like, self-reflection, I don't know what to do. We use the ORID model. I don't know if you've heard of that, but basically, so it's ORID. It's objective, reflective, interpretive, and decisional. So this was the easiest thing for me to do, like when writing papers to show that I learned something. Objective is just like what, when, where, why, like what you did. And then reflective is like, how did it make you feel? So that's when you start to think about like, okay, so what did I get out of this? And then interpretive is like, what did you really learn from it? So instead of scratching the surface, like then you're really like, Kaylin, dig deeper. And so what did you really learn from it? And then decisional is like, what are you going to do with it? So you can it's easy to give assignment or a project, a service learning project, and be like, okay, and then it's done. Deadlines don't really mean deadlines all the time. That like, did it really spark something within myself? Am I going to keep working with that service project? So that was, I think, the most helpful model for me to learn by. Just with self-reflection, like I said, that was difficult. But otherwise, just having the opportunity in school. If your teacher says to do something, then you're probably going to do it if you want to get a good grade. Now, with service learning, having it as an option of like a track for the class, then it gives you the opportunity to be graded on something that you're really getting a lot more out of, instead of just readings or lectures, things like that. So I think just presenting it as an option to do. If it's there, then you're going to feel less like, well, I don't have time. But if you think, oh, it's required, then maybe I'll do it. But then I think you really realize that you're getting a lot more than just trying to get a grade.
And I know it was like that in our class. Upper division business class has pretty varying levels of enthusiasm. And so it was required. And I know the first day you just saw faces just go dry and just go, I'm not doing this. And I have a job, and you heard every excuse, and I don't have any time. I do not have 15 extra hours this semester. And our professor was just like, well, you don't have to turn it in. I mean, you can still pass the class. If you don't do it, you won't get an A, but I mean, you don't have to do it. And then people were like, well, I'm going to do it. And then progressively throughout the semester, we had discussion sessions about it in tandem with our journals and our service learning papers. And you could see people like change course like halfway through the semester. They were getting something out of it. They were having fun. At the end, of course, there was kids that didn't get anything out of it, but that's business class. There's always those kids, especially in MIS. But I think that people didn't even realize how much they got out of it until the last session. So I think, as much as I hate to say force them to do it, but she forced us to do it, and it helped a lot of us. I was actually had a unique perspective because it was the first time I didn't have a job. I decided I'm not working my senior year. So when I looked at it and said 15 hours, I was like, I actually have 15 hours. And then I ended up investing, 30 hours into the project and another, 25 when I did the accelerated course. So you sort of lose track of that it was a requirement and that it was 15 hours. And if you're getting something out of it, it doesn't really matter whether it was required or not.
We have to kind of wrap up, but if you have to go, if you guys say.
Well, I would go along with that too. It's just that initial push, like mine was a class, it's a required class, and just you don't have an option. You have to go do this project. You have to get out there and you have to do it. And once you get away from that idea of someone is telling you to do something, you really take a lot more away from it. So you need that push, but then in the end, you kind of get enlightened at the end, I would suppose.
You sort of forget that you were required to do it in the first place.
Yeah.
Not so bad.
I think personally for me, it's just inspiration through cold hard facts. Like, these are the facts. These are currently what's happening right now. And for me, I guess I'm easily inspired, so maybe it's not too much of a learning process for me to, I'm not dragging my feet to do it. I want to do that. I want to do things. I want to make change. So I guess for me, it's just, like, especially say you watch a documentary and you're like, oh my gosh, what can I do to help? And so that's, for me, it's just being inspired by facts.
Great. Well, we're out of time, guys. Sorry, we're a little bit short, but. So as Andrea said, I'm Jim Caringi, and how many of you are from the U here? Okay, and we've got folks from...
I'm Brian Beck from MSU Billings.
Billings, cool.
MSU Bozeman.
Bozeman, where else?
University of Montana Western down Dillon.
Western, cool. Thanks for coming.
Flathead Valley Community College.
Flathead Valley, okay. We've got a 2+2 program in social work for you guys, okay. Who else?
Montana Tech.
Montana Tech. Okay, so I guess are you going to change that for everyone?
For you.
Okay. So as Andrea said, I'm a couple different things here at the university. I'm the director of the Master of Social Work program here, which we have at the U. And I'm also the coordinator of qualitative research for the Institute for Educational Research and Service, which is through the School of Ed and houses the National Native Children's Trauma Center, where I do a lot of my work and a lot of my research agenda, which is partly what we're talking about today, bringing in service learning, and for me, more participatory designs of research into our research agenda. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about background, some concepts, and then talk about some current projects. So how have I and my students, the institute I work for, and the school found ways to bring participatory designs into research. I heard, I missed because of a very sick little girl at home, unfortunately. My wife is a public school teacher, and we're hunting back and forth today. So anyways, I missed the keynote, but I heard it was something that I would have loved to hear about. I'm talking with Dean McCusick, that the basic message being, get out there, do the work. Don't just sit in your ivory tower and do your research, but go out and make a difference. And I think both of us believe that that's absolutely what needs to happen, and I'm sure most of the folks here. Interestingly, along the lines of research, one of the things that we always have to think about is funding, right? So how are we going to do what we do? I've really experienced a major difference from my doctoral program in the early 2000s where I started getting into participatory action research. It wasn't getting funded, and at the time I was kind of the really interesting, kind of different doctoral student that wanted to do this different type of research that was really cool, but maybe we weren't so interested. Nice to think about, but that was it. Funding really wasn't happening. Well, here we are at the University of Montana, and I've had what I think to be very good success in getting these community-based participatory research designs funded to get students involved. And I've oftentimes asked myself, well, what changed? What's the question? Because I don't feel any smarter. I don't feel as if that what I'm doing is any different, but I think it's pretty exciting to see that some of these funding agencies have kind of come around. I promise I'm not checking my messages, I just don't have a clock, so 3 o'clock. Anyways, let's move ahead. The other thing that I wanted to point out too was that I didn't know this at the time, but most of my practice life, and before I went on to what sometimes I refer to as the dark side of academia, I was a practicing clinician and did much of that work in the state of Alaska in very, very rural communities. One of my jobs was as a community health development coordinator in these 2 very small villages accessible only by a small plane, where I was charged with being both a therapist, and then also a community organizer working with the chiefs and tribes to help them formulate their own health goals. So what made sense to me was sitting down with the chiefs, with the tribal councils, and finding out what it was that they knew, what it was that they thought needed to happen, as opposed to me coming in as the outside social worker saying, this is what you all need to do to fix your problems, not building on their strengths either. Lo and behold, I found out in a doctoral seminar a couple of years later that I was doing this thing called participatory action research. I didn't know that at the time, but it's what I was doing. So I've got a definition here for you, just briefly, of what action research is. How many of you know about action research? Heard a little bit? Okay, so anyways, it's a participatory democratic process concerned with developing practical knowledge in the pursuit of worthwhile human purposes. So I think it goes a little bit along with what I hear our speaker talked about today during lunch at the keynote. It's grounded in a participatory worldview which we believe is emerging at this historical moment. It's happening right now. It seeks to bring together action and reflection, theory and practice. I think what's important here is that it all happens at the same time. Action researchers aren't about starting an intervention, letting it go for a good year, semester, and then seeing if it works at the end. Research and practice happening at the same time. It is in pursuit of practical solutions and issues of pressing concern to people, and more generally, the flourishing of individual persons in their communities. So it's all about community as well. Go ahead, Rob. The other concept that I'd like to put forth is this idea of a theory of change. So traditional research, I think, really is more interested in explaining things. So a definition, this is why this is happening. For example, we're interested in things like poverty, domestic violence. I research both primary and secondary trauma in my work, why that happens. That's really great, but if you're a master's level social worker, for example, working in these communities, you want to know the next step. So what is it that you actually have to do to change it? And one of the theories or ideas behind this is the best way to understand the system is to try to change it, to be in there rolling up your sleeves and trying to do that. Oftentimes traditional researchers, and I don't want to, and when I'm talking about traditional research and different types of research, alternative methods, alternative perspectives, I think it has to be both and, not either or, so I'm not poo-pooing anything. But saying that oftentimes traditional researchers will criticize action research because it's value-laden, it's political, and it comes in with assumptions, and it's oftentimes done by the people that are actually doing the work. Well, as action researchers, we believe that that's exactly what we need it to be. We're the ones that know, and we should be doing that. Now, if we can bring in a randomized control trial about certain things and try to figure out if it's happening, then great. But oftentimes, what we deal with in the social sciences, certainly in social work, are what I refer to with my students as messes. Poverty is a mess. Domestic violence is indeed something that has a messy nature to it. It's very difficult to kind of pinpoint this is why it's happening. The other thing that I would put is, in terms of the idea of theory of change is this idea of a machine trick. So there's a sociologist named Thomas Becker who says that the best way to understand a sociological problem is to try to think about a mass production machine that would create that problem, as if it were a car. So when I get in my car, I could backwards map that and go, if I don't have the raw materials, if I don't have the know-how, if I don't have the people power, the money, I'm not going to have a car to drive. Well, the same is true with poverty. And if you look at that, it's rather daunting. But what's important is for us as researchers to look at all those things and then be able to evaluate the programs that are trying to impact poverty or domestic violence. I'm using those two for examples presently now. Because if we don't influence all those things, we're not going to wind up influencing that phenomenon that we want to influence. Okay. There's a body of literature on this as well. So community-based participatory research is also something that Robin and I are both involved in. And there are many definitions of this out there as well, but it's a collaborative approach to research that equitably involves all partners in the research process and recognizes the unique strengths that each brings. So in the work that I'm doing in many of the communities here in Montana, some reservation communities, that's absolutely the case. And I'll mention some of those projects now. where we are equal partners and we're invited into the communities, especially in these tribal communities. We don't do so without a tribal resolution. We have to have that. CBPR begins with a research topic of importance to the community with the aim of combining knowledge and action for social change, improving community health disparities. So this was Minkler does work in community health disparities. Go ahead, Robin. So there are 9 principles of CBPR that I'll point out and then talk about some projects and hand this over to Robin. So, through extensive research, CBPR is based on 9 principles, and these are offered with caution because they don't work for all communities or all systems. Partnerships consider principles they adopt as ideals or goals and evaluate the extent to which they are doable. Multiple principles reflect multiple ways of doing CBPR. So that's another criticism sometimes that happens with community-based participatory research because there's many different ways to do it. But something that works, for example, back in upstate New York where I'm from, or working on a Mohawk reservation, might not at all work here at my camp. Okay. So CBPR acknowledges community as a unit of identity. It builds upon strengths and resources within the community, and it facilitates a collaborative, equitable partnership in all phases of the research. So this is from the beginning of formulating research questions, even before that, figuring out if it's something that want to be researched, getting funding, all the way to dissemination. We don't disseminate research in any of our projects at the Institute for Educational Research and Service without co-authors that are from the community, for example. It fosters co-learning. It actually dovetails with the idea of a community of practice or a community of learning. Achieves a balance between knowledge generation and the intervention for mutual benefits of all partners, and focuses on local relevance and looks at social inequalities. Got one more, please. Another one. Go on to the next one. It involves systems developing using a cyclical and iterative process. So this is what I talked about a minute ago, that the research doesn't happen at the end, but it's research and practice happening at the same time. Disseminates results to all partners. This is important too. In some of the traditional research I was involved in, we'd be lucky to go out and give a report back to the community if they got it handed to them, and if they understood it, well, great, but if they didn't, there wasn't much interaction. Furthermore, we'll go into the communities and see if it makes sense, see what we missed. Oftentimes we'll get very close. Most of the time we do, but oftentimes we'll miss some things as well. It's a long-term process and has a commitment to sustainability. So right from the beginning, writing grants, that's one of the principles that I work by myself as an academic, that I'm just not interested in being involved in projects that are going to end at the end of that 3-year, 5-year, or 1 year now funding sometimes that we get. So if there isn't a sustainability component to it, we certainly at least question it. Okay, go ahead, Rob. So I just want to point out some of the current research projects that I'm doing and say that, again, I'm coming from more of a participatory approach. We do have some service learning courses that are designated in our Bachelor of Social Work programs and our Master's program. All of our students are required to do, over the course of 2 years, if they're full-time, 900 hours of practicum experience, which indeed is service learning. We call it a practicum. Many of those students get involved in research projects, and that's something else that I'm committed to, is always writing in ways that we can get students involved. So the first project that I'm involved in is a 5-year Children's Bureau funded project looking at traineeships in child welfare. So in child welfare, there is an epidemic of turnover. Where I did my initial research in New York State, we had some counties that had a turnover rate of 114%. So everyone left, they rehired, and then 14% of those folks didn't even stay the rest of the year. This project has an element to it called design teams, which is the participatory part. We go into each agency that has trainees and do a traditional research project, but then bring that information back to the agency and form these management teams that actually help implement solutions organizationally to try to impact turnover and then also outcomes, how they're doing the work. We have students that are involved in this project and working with me as well that are actually helping co-facilitate those teams. And there's also some contagion effects that happen when those students come back to the classroom and share what they're doing, which seems to have a good effect. I'm also involved coordinating the qualitative research for the FIRE project, as we call it, Field Initiated Research and Evaluation, to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. We're partnering with the community of Fort Peck to do this. We have a long history of working with that community. And this is a project to evaluate the effectiveness of an intervention to help kids that have experienced trauma. And although I want to point out first off that there are many, many strengths in that community, tremendous amount of strengths, that there are also some difficult things that are going on. And we're seeing very large amounts of high percentages of the kids in these schools that have experienced not single but multiple traumas. So what we're doing is trying to find a way to help these kids such that they can do better with their learning in schools. This is also a participatory approach. We just applied for another grant that is I'm very excited about. This is probably the most participatory oriented project that I've ever been involved in. And what we're doing there is actually partnering to the effect of having a co-manager of the project in the community, who's a local man who is a spiritual leader and has been for years participating in cultural activities in the community to try to impact the things like trauma, like substance abuse, domestic violence, in ways that they would have traditionally for years. And he's had tremendous success. In his community, there have been no suicides. And in this community, for the last 5 years, that's something that's unheard of. I won't get into the statistics, but we were just out there earlier this year with the Indian Health Service because of the fact that one of the other communities had was referred to as a cluster suicide, meaning that there were a very high concentration of suicides in a short amount of time. So we're using both traditional methods and also community-based participatory research methods. We're proposing to do this research with him. I've put it up here because we've, I think in the right way, committed to do this work whether it's funded or not. So we're going to find a way. We're hoping that Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs will decide that they want to fund it. If they don't, we'll do it in another way. And I think that that's something that's important with participatory designs as well. I'm also involved in 2 studies relative to secondary genetic stress. So I mentioned that one of my research areas is looking at trauma. Well, when you work with trauma, you go out and you hear terrible things that people have experienced over and over throughout a day, throughout your career. That has an impact on you that can result in symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder in those folks that are actually doing the work. So we're researching that and decided at the Institute that in order to be ethical, we need to do that. We can't send people out there, whether it's a cultural intervention or a more Western European way of looking at trauma, an American way of looking at trauma, without finding ways for them to help themselves. So these are 2 projects that are going on, and what we're doing with those, taking the traditional research then back to the LCSWs, to the licensed clinical social workers, or to Missoula County Public Schools, where we're doing that study there, looking at the impact on teachers, which has never been done before. Finally, the 2 things that I'd like to point out are the 2 classes that we have at the School of Social Work, where I think we're doing a good amount of action research, participatory designs, and actually Social Work 360 Groups and Communities is a social work designated, or a service learning designated class, where we have bachelor's level students going out, picking a problem, and figuring out what they're going to do about it, and actually making that positive change in the community. The last one that I was involved in, the students did 2 things. They went out to DeSmet School, which is one of the schools just outside of Missoula. It feels like it's in Missoula, but it's its own district, where they have upwards of 95% of the students who are eligible for free lunch, which is one of the major indicators for things happening for kids that really you don't want to happen. They went out there, they developed a community garden, That was 2 years ago, the last time I taught that particular class, and it's still going. So an example of sustainability, the school has taken it on themselves, and they've involved some other community partners to keep that going. I teach an advanced research class at the master's level, so it's the same, the last year for MSW students. And that class is completely based in participatory designs. Students are doing program evaluations in their practicum sites where they have to go out and develop evaluations that the agencies either do on the spot or they hand over to them that they will do. I like them to complete as much as they possibly can. And then another project where they have to develop, relative to one of the concepts that I talked about, their own theory of change. So deciding what it is that they are going to do about a particular issue by backwards mapping that issue and getting very intricately into what the causes are, coming up with a solution-based outcome that hopefully they can start, but being that we have a semester given what we're given by the university, they do what they can with that project. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And I know we're running a little behind today too, and we're going to try to get you out of here on time anyways, and we'll leave some time for questions, but I'll hand it over to Robin.
You want to take a couple of questions while I get voted?
Sure. Are there any questions or thoughts? Yes.
How do you assess learning in a service learning, a research-based service learning?
Good question. I should point out too that we have a traditional research class that the students have first. So they come to my class and that's what they ask because they can't figure out if there's no SPSS project, how am I going to evaluate them, right? So I have a rubric that has specific areas inclusive of the principles of CBPR. So I want the project to be doable. I want it to have real world impact. I also want it to have academic rigor. I didn't talk much about that, but I do with them. And then I ask them to get involved in a co-evaluation process where they get to chime in on how they think they did too. And I find that that's very interesting too, because as much as we're also, our program has a social justice mission. So many of our students come to us with that, for that reason. But still, when I ask them to evaluate themselves, I find they're incredibly hard on themselves. So it's interesting. Yes?
You mentioned it just briefly, academic rigor. How do you measure that in a service learning class, especially if there are different projects?
Absolutely. Well, I think that the definition of rigor that I like best is rules. There has to be rules that we follow. So we start off looking at the traditional ways of looking at research. So is a project reliable? Does the outcome have validity? But then also look at related concepts of credibility and trustworthiness and qualitative research. So we do both. And nothing changes. I think all good research starts with either a hypothesis or from my perspective, a good research question, and then flows from that. So I challenge them all along the way from that traditional viewpoint to try to have as much of that rigor as possible. So, and sometimes we sacrifice some traditional rigor to have that outcome-based. Yeah.
You mentioned that the semester is short. Sometimes they have to come up with maybe changes or solutions in a short time. Do you ever have a student the following semester take over the project? And
yes.
I would think
yes.
That would make it sustainable and perhaps more in depth.
Absolutely, and I have my kind of projects that I like. So I always try to hook students up, and it happens all the time with colleagues in Fort Peck. That happens, and then I commit. Sometimes to my demise, to work with students on the projects beyond the class.
Right.
So if they're going to continue working on the project, I'll be consultant. There's no grades, but it's social justice.
Yeah.
So we do it. Yeah.
How would you suggest applying community-based research on, say, a block schedule like what we have at Western, where you have a very escalated time pace, where you've got 18 days per class, 3.5 weeks? And I think that's the biggest issue we run into down there is that we want to adopt a lot of these ideas. We have
Do you teach there?
Well, kind of. I do the 095 Broadway course actually down there. But I'm also their campus core team leader.
Okay. First off, I think you can really concentrate these things for sure. But I think the better way to do it would be to have faculty coordinate. What's one project that you could work on that you could do in a writing class, that you could do in a tech class, that you could do in a social work class? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then everyone picks it up for part of it along the way.
And that's kind of what we look at, is maybe doing those stretch courses, because we're starting to implement those now, where we have, say a probability class, they can do a pre-calc and a calc, or something like that, where they're kind of following that chain as they go along. So it might be something that they start block 1 and then actually finish up block 4 at the end of the semester.
Yeah.
But then the issue with that is working with the faculty and getting all 4 members on the same page as the research is going on.
Yeah, sure. And it's I think it mirrors the real world and how research goes. It never goes as planned. And at the National Native Children's Trauma Center, our mantra is that when we go into a community, we have to maintain a rigid state of flexibility. So, and it's true. My students sometimes really initially rail against some of the things I say because they want it to be neat. They want me to tell them, well, this is what I need to do to get rid of domestic violence. This is what I need to do to get rid of child abuse. And I don't have those answers. We're talking about very complex problems here. But really, I think a lot of this is about teaching critical and further analytical thinking. So, anything else? We're running out of questions, Robin.
Wait just a second there.
So what's better, Montana or Alaska?
Well, look where I am, Montana.
Okay.
No, I think that they're very. The first time that I was up in Glacier and then around the Bob was the first time I ever felt like there is a place in the lower 48 that's kind of like Alaska. It's not. There's a lot of similarities. Spent more and more time in Helena, and there's a lot of similarities in terms of how we run our government. Yeah, absolutely. But Alaska's unparalleled when it comes to the distances. Yeah. And as a social worker, I was like literally getting dropped off on a beach for maybe a day, maybe several days, depending on when they could come back and get me. But it was a wonderful time. Privilege. Do you all use participatory designs or service learning in what you do? Everything?
We're getting there.
You're getting there?
But we have a small department.
What the department is?
It's a service learning department.
Service learning department.
What would it be? The community. It's within the community involvement.
Okay. One of the things we do at the School of Social Work too is we've developed some 2+2 programs. We have one at Flathead Valley actually, and we have our second one starting at Stonechild Community College on the Rocky Point Reservation. So maybe we need to get one going.
What exactly is a 2+2?
Basically what it is that students can take care of all their general education requirements and everything in their first 2 years wherever they are. And then we've got a distance component to the program where they can still stay in their community and basically get their degree without ever forcing them to come to Missoula.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Anyways.
We don't really want ours to leave, though.
You want them to stay.
Yeah.
And so do we. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim, for that great setup. I don't have to say very much now because you know what CDPR is in action research, and so what I'm going to talk about mainly is sort of a 5-year project I've been having going on where I mainly use my classroom as a means for involving students in an action research project. I have a number of ways that I do that, but I'm just going to be mainly talking about one. Some of the work that I do in environmental studies is very policy analysis oriented. And so, for example, I recently had students involved in doing a greenhouse gas inventory for the city of Missoula for their municipal operations, and then involve students afterwards and kind of really tidying that up and making it publishable. So providing a service to the city that they didn't have the resources to normally carry out. I'm also involved with the Blackfeet tribe in a CDPR project that's funded by the NIH, and it addresses housing and health issues related to mold in the housing up there. I've also developed, and part of this, a lot of this work is really developing partnerships with communities. And Jim mentioned how you really do have to sustain a commitment over a long period of time. And one of the communities I began when I first came here to Montana in 2003 to get involved with was the Community of Opportunity. And so I'll tell you a little bit about how I've had students involved in action research projects, and then also how I'm trying to use that to develop a paper also that can talk about teaching and instruction and some of the community and student outcomes from the work over time. Next. So Opportunity is a town that's near Anaconda. You can see the little map there. It has, the community is about 5 miles from Anaconda, and it's a very rustic community. It's in the shadow of the big stack, the Anaconda smelter stack there. It has a very high water table, a lot of wetlands around it. It's in a Superfund area. It's in a Superfund site, and there's a number of, there's a huge waste repository that's right nearby, and contamination, groundwater contamination around it as well. Next. And so this Superfund site, I just described some of those things that it has. There's a responsible party. It was ARCO who bought Anaconda Copper in the 70s, but then British Petroleum bought them, so now they're the responsible party, and it's, that might be a misnomer, but they are paying up, and so they're responsible for the cleanup and the protection of the public health under EPA's guidance. And the way I got involved is I initially asked some of my students to look into what are some of the environmental issues in rural communities in Montana, and they kind of plugged in on this one. And I was very interested in it because my background's in environmental justice, which has to do with the disproportionate impacts on people of color and low-income communities of environmental hazards. And so I found that this was a rural community. It was a working class community predominantly. There is a good demographic mix in the community, but they were not very engaged in some major cleanup decisions that were going on. Most prominently, the decision about where to put contaminated sediments from nearby Missoula from the Milltown Dam cleanup. So 2.6 million cubic yards of contaminated materials were planned to go up there, and the public records showed that they didn't really like it, but they weren't really, it was really hard to find that they were opposed to it. And that to me signaled that they maybe were not being able to have their voices heard as effectively as they might have liked. So next. So it's not like Missoula there. Okay? Not a lot of environmental awareness, not a lot of, they embrace their mining history. Rather than clean up this area, they can, and which they could have scraped away all the contaminated soil, they put soil on top of it and made a golf course and used slag. This is a Jack Nicklaus, rated golf course, and then they use slag for the sand traps, and have all sorts of mining machinery around the golf course. Anyone been there out there? Okay, so I've never been out there, but it's just interesting what the culture is like there. So next. So I'm an environmentalist going up there, having to be aware of my values, and also students coming from many different other states needing to work with the community. They have a lot of spirit. They have an annual Opera Days, they call it, for Opportunity. Next. And this gives you a sense of how they do come together, these 250 households that live up there. Next. And they have a lot of fun. Next. And next. So this is an aerial photograph. The town of Opportunity would be right here. And you can see that there's a lot of green area in there too. This is the Superfund waste repository. So that's 5 square miles. There's about 40 foot of contaminated mining sediments built up there. Not much is growing there. They're trying to get things to grow there. Next. So that gives you a sense of the scale. What happened there? Let's try the next one. This shows you that there's actually a physical berm of material there, and some of the roads going up into the area. that has, there's different numbers, but, and they don't really mean much. What's 300 million or cubic yards, but it's a tremendous amount of material. Next. But you can see that, in contrast, the community is fairly bucolic. It was actually built as sort of a way of aniconic copper demonstrating that people could live in the shadow of the stack. They were getting a lot of bad press in the early 1900s because of all the arsenic-laden emissions that were coming off and killing a lot of livestock. So they gave a lot of the workers 5 or 10 acres and put these drainage tiles underneath because there's so much water there that they need, that keeps it from flooding. Next. So, and next. So the repository has been receiving waste from a number of other Superfund cleanups around the state. So there's sort of like I call it a state sacrifice zone in a way. And a lot of people say, well, you know, it's probably better that there's one place to put these things than many. I think that's definitely a good point. They were told that the waste from the mill town would grow grass on it, and so far it hasn't. And so it's this barren moonlight escape, and when it dries out, the dust blows in and around the community.
Not even
Oh, no. Next. Eventually they'll get something growing. So that just shows you the diagram of the pond, what they call they used to call the opportunity ponds. And they actually put all that waste material on a wetland. So it is kind of draining into Warm Springs. So it's a little bit of a mess, but it's not really practical. The only thing you do with all that stuff is take the Berkeley pit, I suppose, but that's been ruled out. Next. So you can sort of, you can just fire through some of these, but these just show you some of the area, how difficult it is to grow things in the area, some of the trees that have died, the old stack that's there, it's a state park. I'm sure some of you have been there. Next. And the train cars bringing the sediment from Milltown. So these slides show you some of the dust that blows occasionally, several times a year through the community, and so you pretty much need to close up your windows during that time. Most of this dust comes off of the repository. And next. And next. So part of what the citizens that we've been working there and doing on our urging is to take these photographs and send them to decision makers and make sure to document some of these events going on. Next. So this is just a description of some of the service learning projects that I've had students involved with in various classes of mine, and in many cases their involvement in these projects has led them to go on and do additional research as part of professional papers or theses. And I've typically taught offered a service learning with the community of opportunity through my environmental justice course, which has changed numbers over the time, but it's settling in on EDST 477, of course with common course numbering, C. It's a mixture of graduate and undergraduates in the class, and so it creates some really interesting opportunities for students to work together and at their different skill levels. I guess what I wanted to point out here is that the first effort we did was not to do anything, but was to study the situation and get a sense of the lay of the land, the socio-political, socio-cultural context, the political history of the area. And so the first group of students just did simply a needs assessment and a stakeholder analysis and made a couple recommendations to the community, and one of those recommendations was get yourself organized, form a community group. And that's one of the things they did. After that, there was more questions about, did the community see, did this community have sort of unified concerns, or was there division in the community in terms of concern about water quality and air? And, are we going to create a conflict in the community, or are we really doing what the community wants to do? And so some of the next set of things had to do with assessing community concerns. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of those projects, but mainly just focus then on, well, so what? What's happening now? Next. This is the community group that formed the Opportunity Citizens Protection Association. That's Serge. He I call him the Aaron Brockovich of opportunity. And you can see he's got all, he doesn't mind me saying that. And so we've got a good friendship. And you can see him with all his research that he's done there. And he gives me and my students credit for really getting them engaged and getting them involved. And they actually won the Montana Environmental Health Association's Best Community Group Award a couple years ago. And I presented with them at the National Mining Summit in Butte a couple years ago as well. Next. So they've been demanding and asking for a lot of things, some of which are more realistic than others. They said that, look, because we've got a contaminated water plume up gradient from where we live, that we've got a bullseye on us, we're all on well water. And they said that the powers that be should give them a new water system. And what we found is that the community was very divided on that. And through our assessments, doing survey research in the community, and recommended that they not try to push for that unless they first did more education in the community and were able to get a lot of people on board. A number of things that they work on, especially the dust concerns. They were able to, originally the pond was called the Opportunity Ponds. They really didn't like the name of their town being used for a waste repository. And they sort of thought that that was stigmatizing their town, and they took kind of the name back and they forced EPA to designate it as the BP waste repository. So I thought that was a very positive move. Let's keep steaming along here. This is one of the first studies that students did, and it was a mixture of graduates and undergraduates, and they designed a survey. They went out in the community, and I think they were able to get something like 50 households. I forget the exact number, but they did a geographically stratified sample. Next, and I'm not going to share the results, but just sort of talk a little bit. There's surge with the students. Next, the purpose was to assess concerns about the water, to gauge the level of health and safety concerns, and the quality of information. Were people feeling like they were informed enough about their water? Where were people getting their information, and who did they trust? It was actually universities that they trusted the most, we found, which was great. I don't know if they were just, cozying up to us or not, but, and just to determine how receptive they were to municipal water system, as I mentioned. And next. So we did, it was 30 households. So it was still a pretty good sample of the community. I had since, after that, had a student that did focus groups and interviews and more in-depth study of these concerns. Next. And so there's getting to know the neighborhood, and you can see them with their clipboards there. So they had a lot of fun, and the community group helped them to announce that they were coming, and people knew about it and were happy to have them there. Next. So they did find that there were a majority were very concerned about their water and the future. But most people surveyed would like more information. But as I said, they also found that there was a pretty even split between whether people wanted to have a water system, a central water system, or not. So next. So we recommended more testing. We found out that very few people had actually had their wells tested, and that was one of the results. We recommended people have filters installed. And so we reported these results back to the community group, but we also then, when we were going around door to door, we gave health and safety tips. And there was a public meeting too where these results were shared. There were about 60 people there at that public meeting. So we also tried to get more people involved in EPA and ARCO, more engaged with the community, as well as the Clark Fork River Technical Assistance Committee, which is based in Bonner. Next. Then another group decided what they were going to do was they were going to, and our department provided some funding, the Watershed Health Clinic, one of my colleagues provided some funding, a couple $1,000. This group of students, interestingly enough, a couple of international students, one from Afghanistan and one from Serbia, were involved in a citizens-initiated water monitoring project where the students got training on how to sample water, sent them off to the lab, and then reported the results back. And actually all but one of the homes checked out pretty well, so that was reassuring. Part of what, okay, keep going. Other action research projects that the students did was a more in-depth assessment of community concerns. That was a professional paper, provided a number of recommendations to the community group about how to work more effectively with the community because they didn't really have the full support of the community and were sort of seen as maybe the oddballs a little bit by some people. And then we started a series of dust testing projects, and we just finished up the third one. And these are very low budget, very hands-on, involving residents themselves in some of the work. Next. There have been some outcomes. We've certainly developed a good relationship with the community, and for a department that's sometimes seen as not caring about people and caring more about the environment, this has been helpful, I think. And I'm an environmental sociologist by training, and so this work, it really helps, I think, in making our work more diverse and our outreach more going beyond maybe the traditional definitions of what the environment should pay attention to. The EPA also required air monitoring of the dust and sampling of the dust. This was, several $100,000 of monitoring equipment. And so we've been monitoring and monitoring. And they also did an intensive investigation of groundwater in the area. And all of this was paid for by BP ARCO. They required a dust management plan and had forced the company to go back to the drawing boards because it was inadequate in many ways. And as a result, the company spent about $1 million on dust management and dust control. Still could work a little better, still some glitches. We were also able to secure a $2.5 million special parks appropriation for the community. It was all supposed to go to Missoula, and then half of it got split for $5 million. That was sort of a big debate, and I think ultimately it's a fair thing that we're sending all our waste, we're getting our river cleaned up, and so part of that was to bring parks and to create amenities related to the cleanup, and so it's only fair that they get that with that huge pile there. And a number of different groups becoming more involved and working with the community, greater awareness of the community and greater awareness of sort of a watershed scale, that we're really connected in a lot of ways at this watershed level. Next. So I'm starting to ask some questions and engaged in a research on how this has been working. And I'm asking this question of what are the outcomes for the community, and how are they really linked to the work we've done? And what are the student outcomes? Are the students understanding of environmental justice or understanding of rural communities, or the needs of historically communities that historically not been involved in environmental issues? Is that part of their work now? Is a number of different questions related to that, and what did they get out of those experiences? I'm not doing pre and post, so it's going to be sort of more of a case study of this 5-year process of different projects feeding into one another. And I found actually that students like knowing that some other students have been involved and that they're picking up the baton's kind of passing to them. Next. What I'm going to be doing for this research is triangulating. So comparing what the students' written work, and including their reflections and final reports, seem to say about their understandings of, actually I'm using environmental citizenship as a frame, but then also what do community members and regulators and consultants and other stakeholders and elected officials think of students' involvement and the role that that's played in decision making. And so this conceptual framework I'm developing with a graduate student of mine involving this concept of environmental citizenship, which is much more popular in Canada, and service learning, and then the course objectives. And so we're in the process of writing up our final interview protocol now and getting IRB approval. And we've also uploaded all the student work to in vivo software, where we'll do a qualitative analysis of it. Next. And I mentioned some of the other areas of service learning research that I'm involved in, and I think that's about it. I think it's rewarding as a faculty member to engage students in this way. I have not found it to be fruitful in terms of publications at this point, but I find it to be rewarding in terms of making social change happen and in making and really giving students a meaningful experience that in which they're able to contribute to assisting a community that otherwise wouldn't have either the know-how or the resources to do some of this work. It's been done in collaboration though, and so I think the level of understanding these issues of the community has been increasing at the same time, and so hopefully democracy is as well, and that's the idea of citizenship, of students learning how to investigate issues, to participating in them in a public venue, and working collaboratively with affected parties. So I find it rewarding. I'm really excited to see if what this triangulation shows, if there's some similarities in the perspectives of the affected community, government officials and students, and that'll really be very telling. So maybe in another year, I hope we would have results to share at this point, but maybe in another year I'll have that ready to share. So thanks. So trying to get done before too late. Are there any quick questions though? I know people probably want to.
What does the NVivo software do?
Oh, it's it allows you to code, and then you can sort of take out text and passages and look at them together and sort of see if what people are saying, and kind of really it just makes things easier to analyze different themes that are coming out of what people are saying, and sometimes identify themes that you hadn't been looking at, or kind of organizing that a little bit more conveniently. So, yeah.
It's easier than highlighters and sticking.
Yeah. Less cutting and pasting, right? Any other questions? Thank you all.
Thank you.
My name is Autumn.
Not really. I mean, some people can see it that way. Actually, it's